The Second World War wasn't just a single event. It was more like a cascade of crises, a whole series of desperate gambles and, frankly, fatal miscalculations. So today, we're going to trace that treacherous path, the one that plunged the entire world into its most destructive conflict ever. And we're going to start with a moment of what felt like profound hope, though it turned out to be tragically misplaced. It's September 30th, 1938. The British Prime Minister, Neville Chamberlain, he's just come back from a conference in Munich with Adolf Hitler. He steps off the plane, waves this piece of paper, and declares he's secured peace in our time. You can just imagine the collective sigh of relief across an entire continent. And yet, almost exactly 1 year later, that peace was completely shattered. So how did it all go so wrong, so unbelievably fast? Well, to get the answer, you've got to rewind, back to the end of the First World War. The Treaty of Versailles, which was signed in 1919, was supposed to guarantee a lasting peace. Instead, it planted what you could only call a time bomb right in the heart of Europe. And a really key part of that time bomb? It's this number, 6.6 billion pounds. This was the absolutely massive sum in reparations forced onto a defeated and war-torn Germany. It wasn't just a fee, it was an economic burden designed to be crippling. And man, did it fuel a deep, lasting resentment. And this just kicked off a horrible, vicious cycle. The war ends, which leads to this harsh treaty, which then leads to this devastating hyperinflation in 1923. I mean, prices spiraled so out of control that people's entire life savings became worthless, like overnight. Then, just when things were kind of stabilizing, bam, the 1929 Wall Street crash hits, triggering a global depression and sending German unemployment soaring past 6 million. Now, all this chaos, it became the perfect fertile ground for a really dangerous myth to take root. The idea that the German army hadn't actually been beaten on the battlefield, but was stabbed in the back by its own cowardly politicians. It was a complete lie, of course, but for a nation feeling totally humiliated, it was a powerful one. And it was expertly wielded by extremist politicians like, you guessed it, Adolf Hitler. So, with Germany just seething, the stage was set for the 1930s. And this was a decade defined not just by aggression, but by the rest of the world just failing to act. It was a series of gambles by these expansionist powers that paid off again and again and again. So the first big test for this new League of Nations shows up in 1931. Japan, needing resources, invades the Chinese territory of Manchuria. The world watches. The League issues a strongly worded condemnation from Geneva. And Japan's response? It was just this stunning act of defiance. They literally just walked out. And in that moment, the world realized the League was a tiger with no teeth. It had no army, no way to enforce anything. It was basically powerless. And the thing is, Japan wasn't acting in a vacuum here. There was this whole trio of aggressive, expansionist powers on the rise. Over in Italy, Mussolini was dreaming of recreating the Roman Empire, so he invades Abyssinia in 35. In Germany, Hitler makes his first big gamble in 36, sending troops into the demilitarized Rhineland, a direct violation of the Versailles Treaty. Every single move was a test of the world's resolve, and every time, they found it wanting. And then came what was basically a dress rehearsal for the main event, the Spanish Civil War. While democracies like Britain and France were declaring this policy of non-intervention, Hitler and Mussolini were pouring troops and weapons in to support General Franco. Germany's Condor Legion got to test out its new bombers, its new tanks, perfecting the very tactics they were about to unleash on the rest of Europe. All of this rearming, all this battlefield testing, it all came together in a revolutionary new type of warfare. They called it Blitzkrieg. And it was about to make the defensive, World War I style thinking of the Allies completely and totally obsolete. Blitzkrieg, it literally translates to lightning war, and honestly, no name could have been more perfect. It was a strategy built on pure speed and shock. Instead of this big, broad frontal assault, the idea was to use a coordinated punch of tanks, planes, and infantry to break through a narrow point, cause mass confusion, and just cut off the enemy from their supplies. And this, right here, this is the key to understanding why it was so devastatingly effective. See, the German army grouped its tanks into these independent panzer divisions, designed for these deep, hard-hitting strikes. But the French and British? They still saw tanks as infantry support, so they just spread them out thinly all along the front line for static, defensive fight. And the first victim of this new doctrine was Poland. The results were just terrifyingly fast. September 1st, 1939, the invasion begins. Within 2 days, the Luftwaffe had basically destroyed the entire Polish Air Force on the ground. The panzers sliced through the lines in these massive pincer movements, and by September 27th, Warsaw had surrendered. A whole country taken in less than a month. After Poland, the Blitzkrieg just steamrolled west, and by June of 1940, France had fallen. Britain was now completely alone. Its army had been evacuated from the beaches of Dunkirk, leaving most of their heavy gear behind. But their new Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, well, he delivered a message of pure defiance. And Churchill's defiance was going to be absolutely critical because this war in Europe was about to explode into a truly global conflict. It was ignited by 2 world-changing decisions that would pretty much engulf the entire planet. The first was Hitler's ultimate and most fateful gamble. On June 22, 1941, he just ripped up his non-aggression pact with Stalin and launched Operation Barbarossa. We're talking a massive 3-pronged invasion of the Soviet Union. And in that moment, Britain gained a powerful, if, let's be honest, deeply unlikely new ally. The second event came less than 6 months later, half a world away. It was Japan's surprise attack on the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor. As President Roosevelt declared, it was a date that will live in infamy, and it brought the full industrial and military might of the United States crashing into the war. Okay, so with the U.S. and the Soviet Union now in the fight, the Axis powers were stretched to their absolute limit. They had reached their high water mark. The tide of the war was about to turn, and it would turn in the frozen, blood-soaked ruins of a single city on the Volga River. Stalingrad. This was so much more than just a military battle. It was a psychological catastrophe for the German war machine. Here, the supposedly invincible German Sixth Army wasn't just defeated, it was surrounded, starved, and in the end, completely destroyed. It was a defeat from which they would simply never recover. And the human cost, it's almost impossible to even wrap your head around. This one battle resulted in about 300,000 Axis casualties, and a similar number of Soviet military casualties. And that's not even counting the thousands of civilians caught in the crossfire. Just a brutal, staggering price to pay for a turning point. And the significance of this moment, you just can't overstate it. After Stalingrad, the strategic initiative on the Eastern Front was lost for Germany. Permanently. Sure, they'd launch counterattacks, but they would never again mount a major, war-winning offensive in the East. The game had changed. So the tide had undeniably turned. The path to an Allied victory, which once seemed unimaginable, was now, well, it was visible. But with years of brutal fighting still ahead on multiple fronts, we're left to wonder about the ultimate question. What would be the final, staggering cost of that victory?